So there's very few people in life you want to follow on stage, and you just saw one of them, which is why I put myself in front. But you're about to see another one who has a very similar style to mine, meaning some comedy mixed with some great insights, all with a very engaging conversation. Jeff Kaplan's been leading ThinkStrategies for 15 years now? Almost 15 years. We'll have an anniversary party soon. But he's a great guy. He's a very smart guy, and he'll have some great insights. So Jeff Kaplan, please come on up.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to actually
Perfect.
roam. So to Andy's point, I've been doing this actually as ThinkStrategies for about a dozen years. It may seem like 15. And what I've been trying to do over those dozen years is educate a number of different folks about the business opportunities associated with something that we didn't call the cloud a dozen years ago. In fact, what was happening was that people were abandoning the idea of utility computing, if you remember that idea, and they were abandoning application service providers. And I thought those two ideas had legs. And let's see if we can get this to the next, there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think that some of the things that have been said today are wrong, just as I felt a dozen years ago the abandonment of the original ideas of ASPs and utility computing was wrong. And I hope that by the time I'm done, I will convince you and add to what you've already heard, because I'm not arguing against the premise of what these people have been saying, especially what Don just said. I think Don's talk was just brilliant. So let me start by talking a little bit about our friends Gartner. And the way I refer to Gartner, because I come from the analyst community, is that Gartner and the rest of the industry analysts represent lagging indicators, okay? Now, we can all throw darts at Gartner because they've said the marketplace is too big, and I absolutely agree with that. But I don't think anybody should be fooled into thinking that the growth rates are also too slow, or too fast, rather. I think they're actually too slow. Because I think that everyone in this room would be a bit surprised to see the level of adoption that's going on around them that is unrecorded, especially by Gartner. Because Gartner just polls their clients, who are the gatekeepers of the past, the CIOs. Gartner does not poll the business community, who have grown tired of the lack of support they've gotten from the IT organizations, and therefore are unilaterally looking for other alternatives. So let's talk a little bit about that. When I started ThinkStrategies a dozen years ago, this is what I saw that in fact is even more acute today. I saw a series of macro market trends that were forcing organizations to think differently about how they acquire and use technology and software. And that idea came to a focus, if you will, by a good friend of mine who came up with a little thesis that he published in the Harvard Business Review about why IT doesn't matter, a guy named Nick Carr. And he wrote that a couple of years after I started ThinkStrategies. And if you look at what Nick had to say, it's even more apparent today that organizations, especially the business side organizations, are fed up with technology and traditional software and looking for alternatives. Now, back at the time of the ASP and the utility computing ideas, we didn't have the right enabling technologies or business models to make them successful. And that's not the case today. The enabling technologies are there, and the business models are becoming more fully baked. And that's why we're seeing companies like Salesforce and Amazon and others have tremendous financial success. So the macro market trends, well, you know, they're obvious, but I should at least repeat them so we keep them in mind. Economic uncertainty continues to exist, at least globally, if not here locally. Growing competition, the lowering of barriers to entry, what Mr. Friedman called, you know, the world being flat, the changing nature of the workplace, which we are all a part of, and then finally, of course, the change in expectations among end users and business executives, okay? Now, the fact of the matter is that most people who work within organizations continue to perceive technology as being a barrier to success, and the IT department as being a barrier to innovation. And that's why they've sought other alternatives. And no matter what survey you check and what research you look at, you're going to find results like these, which attest to that fact. This is a recent survey I found someplace on the web over the past few months, and it says, once again, that most CFOs, and this is interesting, CFOs, who are now thoroughly fed up with the lack of return on investments that they've been able to achieve from their IT organizations. Now, what's interesting about this, of course, is if you look at where the greatest upturn in terms of demand for SaaS apps happens to be, is in the back office, among those same CFOs who are now getting on board the Workday train and looking for other alternatives to help them out. And of course, the CFO, like the CIO, has been one of the biggest opponents to the adoption of SaaS and cloud because of security issues and scalability issues and all the other issues that they perceived. But they're now saying, we've had enough, okay? Of course, we all know about the fact that the devices, and we've talked about it a number of times today, the devices are bringing apps into the office place. It's not just BYOD, it's BYOA. As soon as they get the device, they find new apps. And only a couple of years ago, nobody used the term apps. We didn't sit around the dining room table talking about apps, but now that's the norm. We talk about apps, we experiment with apps, we bring apps into the organization. And those apps have to have a new complexion to them. They have to be social because we're living in a more dispersed work environment, and we need to communicate in new and more effective ways. That can't happen in the old world. So, in the old world, we looked at technology as being the biggest bet that we had to make with our capital investments. And we knew that therefore it would be a complex and long and drawn out process that most likely would never achieve its ultimate objectives. It was just an ongoing journey. And it was a top-down process, and it was a highly centralized process, and you either had one of two choices. You either did with your own people or you outsourced the whole mess to somebody else, and 9 out of 10 times if you did that, you're going to fail. In the new world, what you're looking at is a more flexible model. Now, many organizations who are represented here will probably tell you what I've learned, which is that even when they buy into SaaS and cloud, they'll often buy in on a multi-year basis so they can, in fact, capitalize, if that's the right word, the investment so that it can be accounted for and appreciated appropriately for their financial purposes. So they don't really care about OpEx. In fact, they want to make an investment in the vendor so the vendor's on the ropes, so to speak, to be able to support their needs on an ongoing basis. But the more important thing is how these different alternatives are found and how they permeate from the bottom up rather than from the top down, all right? And the inclination of organizations to look for best-of-breed specialties, and I think, again, that was something that was brought up in the last session, that we're talking about out-tasking, not wholesale outsourcing, okay? So how does this happen? It starts from the edge. It starts with a disgruntled employee, most likely a salesperson who finds Salesforce.com, brings it into the office, and we all know what happens after that. Same thing happens with the business end user who might be doing a project, finds the right kind of collaborative tool, and they bring it into the office, and we know what happens. It starts in the front office, and now, as I said, it's moving to the back office. But even more importantly, it's becoming a reality in an enterprise environment that we used to refer to a dozen years ago as the extranet idea, which is now becoming a real business process innovation around e-commerce, e-procurement, and supply chain. That's stage one, horizontal apps. And we're seeing that marketplace mature and even consolidate in a number of different segments. The second wave, which some of you may see if you've been paying attention within your own industry, is a new set of industry-specific vertical market solutions that were born to address the Byzantine business processes that are really embedded within specific industries, whether it's in healthcare or in insurance or in other areas. In fact, I'm going to refer to the insurance industry in the next slide. This is a company out of Philadelphia, iPipeline, that I became familiar with a couple of years ago. And what iPipeline has done is what I refer to as SaaSifying a Byzantine business process. The specific process is one we can all relate to. It has to do with insurance policy creation. So all of us have probably had to contend with the independent insurance broker, either in our, who comes to our front door of the office or the front door of our home and says, look, you know, I can sell you some new policies that can help to cover your needs. And they pull out their yellow pad and a pen and they start to record the information about your home or your office, and they ask you, okay, so how many kids do you have, how many employees do you have, you know, what are the goals and objectives you have, and you give them that information after hours, so they say, okay, Mr. Kaplan, we got it all figured out, I'll be back to you in a couple of days or a couple of weeks with a proposal. And they come back to you and you're immediately turned off because they have your name spelled wrong, they have the number of kids wrong, the number of employees wrong, and the productivity is atrocious. What this company has done is it's digitized that intake process, put it on an iPad, and more so than that, it's built the back-end engine, supply chain engine, to feed that information instantaneously back to the underwriters so that the broker can then get an immediate quote for the prospective customer and reduce the likelihood of lost business opportunities. At the same time, it's capturing all that data and changing the algorithm by which the various insurance companies measure the success of their sales channel, the broker. So none of this would be possible without the advent of the 3 layers of the cloud that we'll get into. Just one example, but you can find them in almost every industry. You have to go looking for them unless you're in that industry. So there's been a series of very important, if you will, milestone articles that have been written about the transformation of the business environment, one of which I always refer to from a year and a half ago, talked about how software is eating everything. A perfect example of this is when Avis bought Zipcar. And what Avis admitted to was that it was buying Zipcar because of the software. But what it also was saying implicitly was it was buying Avis because, it was buying Zipcar because of the mindset of how they architected that software and their business model on top of the software to make them more agile, to address a market opportunity that Avis couldn't address on its own. And you're seeing similar kinds of acquisitions happening across other industries as well, driven by the software. There we go. Okay, so now the third wave, which we're in the midst of right now, is the most important of all, because the biggest barrier to the adoption of SaaS and any other form of cloud has been the IT organization, which has been scared to death of the security issues, but more importantly, scared to death that they were going to lose their jobs, as we were talking about in the last session. The fact of the matter is, the phone may not be ringing as often as it used to because end users and executives are more satisfied with the availability and the usability of their applications. But it hasn't led to the IT department losing their jobs. They've got other things they could do. What it's led to is them becoming envious of those business executives and end users and saying, you know what, if they can now find applications, enterprise applications, they can help them be more productive in their jobs, I want some of that for myself. So if you look at what's happening next, you're finding SaaS apps aimed at helping the IT organization better manage IT operations really taking off. So now we not only have the IT department saying, I'm going to get out of the way of this SaaS and cloud movement, but hope to guide it in a more effective fashion. And by the way, I'm looking for SaaS apps for myself so I can better manage these operations at the same time, okay? In ServiceNow, tremendous success is an example of this. Not only because it went public, but because it is in fact doing tremendously well, appealing to this audience, okay? Now, the popularization of the cloud doesn't hurt either. The consumerization effect has an effect on the acceptance of this marketplace, and never mind the actual penetration of the market across not only the consumer world, but the business world, right? And by the way, my mother, who's 92, is a subscriber to the New Yorker, and she's often wondered what the hell I do. And when she got her issue of the New Yorker, and she showed it to me proudly, said, now I understand. Now, I'm not sure if she really did, but she felt so proud. She asked me to autograph her copy. No, she really did. Anyways. So, someone also mentioned the last session or the session before about GE. I was at the Cloud Connect conference a couple of months ago, and one of the top IT folks from GE talked about their cloud-first strategy, and we all know about the Obama administration doing the same. There is a trickle-down effect when big brand names, so to speak, basically endorse the idea of moving to the cloud. That's the reason why I'm sure many of you are here, because you're feeling that peer pressure. And by the way, someone also mentioned that this is not a demand-driven marketplace, it's becoming a demand-driven marketplace. I'll tell you about one of my sales friends who's a national sales manager for a top IT technology company with a three-letter acronym, and it's not any that you've heard yet today. And he quit his job recently because he was tired of walking into accounts and having the customer ask him, what's your cloud strategy? And his company had no answer. He said, life is too short for that. And this is not a company that obviously is positioned as a cloud company. It's an established brand we would all know. It's over 100 years old. But it was the customers asking him, and that was not what was on the agenda, okay? So customers are interested, and I believe it's a supply constrained marketplace in many ways, not a demand constrained market, okay? Now, one of the areas I've been very focused on for the past 2 years, and I've hosted a Cloud Analytics Summit about, is this convergence of cloud and big data. And in fact, I think it's the big data issue that is going to help to accelerate the adoption and at least the interest in cloud, because it's the only place they're going to find answers to big data. And we've heard plenty of examples of this. And whether it's the idea of the Internet of Things, or it's the idea that let's see if I can get this thing to build up for us. Come on, baby. There, whoops, I missed it, sorry. We gotta go back. Or if it's the whole idea of just trying to get a better handle on data to make more money. What more and more organizations are recognizing is that the old BI systems just never worked. And the reason they never worked is they were built to be highly centralized and for only a select few of highly specialized data scientists to be able to access any insight from. And we all know that that no longer works in today's highly demanding market. So what I see is an opportunity, and what we're already seeing is an opportunity for the cloud environment, the cloud industry, to respond to that escalating challenge at all three layers. Because again, if it weren't for the cloud, I don't think we'd even be talking about big data in the first place, because we wouldn't have an answer for it. But because of the economic storage resources brought by infrastructure as a service, because of the more user-friendly apps brought by software as a service, and increasingly, and more recently, what we're seeing are the on-demand software development tools at the platform as a service level. Now we have an answer to that escalating volume of data. And that's where the cloud comes in. Now, this guy may look like me because all guys with mustaches look alike. And I am, in fact, a cyclist, but I've never done what this guy is doing right here. I've never worn a suit and tie while I'm riding my bike. And I haven't done the texting thing either, because I know there's probably a truck in his future and I'm not about to hit that truck. But the point is that mobility is not only representing a new endpoint from which we want to access data and insight, more importantly, but of course it is a device that generates data as well. And if we're not capturing that data and recognizing that we have the opportunity, which has become, unfortunately, in a negative sense, a highlight of the news for the past couple of weeks around the heuristics of every keystroke, in fact, being captured. If we as organizations aren't using that to our best advantage to build out patterns, in terms of pattern recognition, and to, in fact, create benchmarks for ourselves in our industries, we're failing to take advantage of that technology, just like we've seen in the past. But unlike what we've seen in the past, we now have access to data that we have the ability to collect, collate, and use in unprecedented ways, kind of like what iPipeline is doing in the insurance industry. Now, I'll give you a simpler example of what this means to me personally and how I see it affecting other business decision makers. I happen to use a email marketing tool based around the corner from me in the Massachusetts area called Constant Contact. And about a year or so ago, Constant Contact sent me a little email using their own service, which was great. And they said, Mr. Kaplan, you know, you've been using our service for a long time, and we have thousands of others like you who have been using the service, and we've been accumulating this data, and we've decided that we now have a critical mass of data that we think has some real significance for you and others. And we've tabulated that data, and if you click here, you'll see a chart which indicates the KPIs for email marketing by industry. Now, this really got me excited because in one of my past lives, I launched the benchmarking practice for Meta Group in the market research business. And back then, in the early 90s, when we were doing it, it was a paper-based questionnaire that we sent out to CIOs, okay? Now, the problem with the business back then was, first of all, it was paper-based, but more importantly, most CIOs didn't know the stats we were asking them to share with us, and more importantly, didn't want to share those stats. Even though they wanted benchmarks to help them, they weren't willing to really share the information. Now we have ready access to that information. It's a question of who's willing to share it. Now, over the past year, Constant Contact has evolved this basic functionality to one where, as I open up my Constant Contact account in my portal, this is in my dashboard every day. So every day I do a mailing or thinking about doing a mailing, I not only see how my mailings are going up and down in terms of their effectiveness, in terms of open rates and click-through rates and all the rest, but I see how they compare and contrast with my peers in the consulting business. That's very valuable to me, very valuable to me. Now, I am by no means a data scientist. I don't want to be a data scientist. I don't want to be a CIO or anything else. I just want to be a business manager who gets my business done. Now, it allows me to better target my solutions. It also allows me to better position my services by having that information at my disposal. Now, I'm convinced more and more people are thinking along these same lines. So, what does it mean in terms of segmentation? Another pretty infamous study that was published in the Wall Street Journal found out, for whatever reason, Apple users are more willing to spend more on their hotel rooms than PC users. And my joke about this is because they're not spending as much time keeping the PCs up and running, so as a result, they can get away with spending more in the hotels. It's a pretty good joke, but at this time of the day, that doesn't get many responses. But anyways, so the point is segmentation, okay? That's number one. The other thing is, of course, satisfaction. And I was just attending another event 2 weeks ago on the West Coast called the Pulse 2013 event, which was focused on this new segment of the market called customer satisfaction management. Because there's a number of people pointing out here about this marketplace, you know, there's the whole thing about alignment of SaaS and cloud with the end user because we have to minimize the idea of churn. But that idea about customer churn is permeating almost any industry now. And there are more and more ways we can track customer satisfaction based on behavior and predict where the vulnerabilities are if we're paying attention. But again, it couldn't happen without the cloud. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the shortage of data scientists. I think, Don, were you the one who said you have 5 kids? Okay, I have to apologize. I'm not as good as you are. I only have 3, okay? And my 3 boys have followed this path to the cloud. And all 3 boys, I would be willing to bet, will be very good data scientists if they ever wanted to be. And one of them wants to be, but doesn't know it yet, okay? So the first step in the process has been that all of them were introduced to Google Apps surreptitiously by student teachers who came into their elementary schools and introduced them unbeknownst to the principal or the superintendent. And now the school is officially a Google Apps school, okay, a school system. That's number one, okay? So they learned how to collaborate. But more importantly, they learned how to collaborate doing this. Basically, destroying universes and killing zombies with all of their friends worldwide on a daily and nightly basis. It's an amazing act of collaboration, virtual collaboration. More importantly today, in reference to the whole idea of data scientists, is all three of them have become data junkies because of this phenomenon, which is the fantasy sports phenomenon. If you've seen the recent reports, the fastest growing segment of fantasy sports players are the tweeners, okay? The 10 to 14-year-olds who are playing this all the time. Now, my youngest son, who's about to go off to UMass for a sports management degree, which they never had before in undergraduate school, is going there because he spent the past 5 years basically managing 5 teams at a time with sports he didn't even care about, like hockey. Now, in Boston, we care about hockey, but 5 years ago, you never did. Now, he spends more time looking at the stats than watching the games. So a good friend of mine says he's going to be a great GM someday. I'm hoping he's going to be an owner. That's a whole other thing. But the point is that because of the popularization of the Moneyball idea, we're all becoming amateur data scientists, and we're all appreciating the value of data. So as a good friend of mine who lives locally in the Boston area says, you know, the data scientist has become the sexiest job on campus. And it's true. Don't tell them that they're statisticians. They don't want to hear about that. Don't even tell them they're going to be data scientists unless they're really smart. I'm just telling my son, you know, you might get that job in sports if you're lucky, okay? Now, again, none of this would be possible if it weren't for the cloud. And nobody would be thinking about it if the cloud weren't there. So what I'm seeing is IT organizations and other organizations who are evolving from thinking of themselves as just IT or software companies, for instance, to business services companies, to information service companies. And it's the value of that information is more valuable or important than the primary service itself. And again, as Davenport has said, whether you like it or not, you're in the data business. And if you think about what's happened in terms of people's perceptions about the cloud, and a number of you have expressed this even today, you know, a lot of people are attracted to the cloud because they have this sense that they can reduce their costs or maybe accelerate the deployment of a project, gain greater time to market. But when they finally get into it, they recognize that maybe some of those benefits aren't as great as they thought they were. But the other benefits in terms of productivity, in terms of added functionality, and most importantly, in terms of innovation, are the things that are really capturing their attention, allowing them to do things they couldn't do before, and therefore giving them an opportunity to gain a competitive advantage in an increasingly competitive marketplace. Now, what's also interesting in the graphics, a little off because of the way in which it's being projected, but you know, as I said before, most adoption up until now has been clandestine. It's been the consumerization effect, the shadow IT effect, and it's happened in the shadows, in the corners of various units. What we're now seeing, and again, I apologize for the graphic, the blue should cover up the entire organization. What we're seeing is CXOs, and many of you may fall into this category. CXOs are recognizing they have to get ahead of this train for a number of reasons. There's security issues, which are obvious, but more importantly, there are corporate resource planning issues. If you don't do this right on a corporate level, you're not going to get the maximum value of this. If you have pockets of best of breed all over your organization, first of all, you're not getting the best price for it, but then secondly, you're not integrating it properly, you're not getting the full value. They're getting smart enough to recognize we have to get IT more involved, and we all have to have a plan as to how we're going to approach this thing. Now, the good news is that it's a buyer's market. The bad news is that there are a lot of players out there, and the cloud washing is rampant, and even my own cloud computing showplace has over 2,200 companies listed on it across 90 different categories. And I'm convinced that's probably less than half of the total population of companies who might call themselves cloud. So I dare any of you to sort that out and know exactly who you want to work with in a short amount of time. And there are a lot of very valid integration issues that go along with this, whether you like it or not. So there's a lot of things you should be thinking about and we have to contend with. And most of you, I think, are from relatively established organizations, even large-scale enterprises. And as a result, you have to start with the mess you've already got, basically. There's no avoiding that. This is not going to be a forklift process. It's going to be an evolutionary, not a revolutionary process. So you have to look at where you're at in terms of your systems. You have to look at where you're at in terms of your culture. You have to look at where you're at in terms of your business objectives and your ability to move from here to there. You also have to think about, as a result, what is your comfort level in terms of the mix of public, private, and hybrid cloud resources you have at your disposal. And ultimately think about what are the realistic objectives you can have 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, 5 years out as you move down this path. And if you do that, then you're going to find that there are ways to take a more deliberate approach while at the same time have a very dramatic impact on your business. Because there are organizations that are changing the way they do business every day and are doing some very, very exciting things in the process. So those are my observations, my points of view. I'm sticking with them whether you like it or not. And I'll be happy to debate them with you over drinks tonight and for the rest of the afternoon. So I hope that was helpful.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Anybody have a quick question for Jeff? All right, we got one over here.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting presentation. Looking at things through a vertical lens, we're talking a lot about financial services, retail / distribution, healthcare.
Yep.
What about manufacturing and supply chain?
Yeah, so manufacturing. One of the fastest growing and most successful ERP companies, and this actually dispels two myths in one, is a company called Plex Systems out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, focused not only in the manufacturing industry, but the automotive industry. And they've been up and charging for the past 5+ years. They've been around for longer than that, but they've actually hit a high growth trajectory over the past 5 years or so. So they dispel a couple myths. First of all, manufacturing is going to be slow to adopt. They are adopting. Automotive in particular, adopting because they had to. They had to change the way they did business. Secondly, ERP. Everybody says, well, people are going to be slow to switch out of the ERP system. They're an example of that. So there's two. Okay? I can give you some more later.
All right, so we're at the most dangerous part of the day. So I'll say goodbye to Jeff while we risk taking a break. But awesome job, Jeff. The videos. So thank you for being a part of the inaugural BigCloud event in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We'll see you next year in March. To all of you, thank you. To our sponsors, thank you very much. Have a great night, everyone.